You've connected to Cisco Unplugged.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Cisco Unplugged. I am Dan Klamert, your host. And this week in episode 41, we're going to be discussing smart buildings, including location, services, sensors, air quality, etc. So I would like to welcome to the show here Mike Connors, our hybrid work SE in Chicago. How are you doing today, Mike?
Doing awesome. No complaints. How about you, Dan?
Good. I'm good. Thank you very much for your time today. Appreciate you coming on.
Of course.
So before we get started, just wanted to give our viewers a couple reminders here. We do record this, and this is going to be posted on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/@getunplugged. Go out there, like and subscribe so you are notified when we do post and share new great content like this. And then we also do take questions via Slido. So if you see the Slido link out there, you can submit your questions, and we do have people standing by ready to answer those questions as well. So I think that's it. So with that, now let's get unplugged. So Mike, what is top of mind for you today? Maybe conversations you're having with customers, et cetera, around smart buildings.
Yeah, Dan, definitely the things that I'm talking to my customers most about are things along the wellness track, such as indoor air quality. That's a big point that's been kind of discussed more and more since COVID, and how we can, increase the efficiency of other systems in a building with some of those data sets, as well as location services and occupant analytics. More and more customers want to better plan for their future state of buildings, so they need that data and that insight onto how the spaces are actually being used by the occupants within a building.
Okay. So as far as location services, let's start there. So I mean, who is using location services, or who does it benefit? Who are you having conversations with location services of customers about that service?
So I'm hearing from most of my customers these days that it's a really important thing, top of mind to them, to various personas within the organization as well. Not only facilities and operations, but HR. They're trying to better understand how people are using spaces, how different business units are within spaces, and how they collaborate with each other in the space. So oftentimes our customers don't necessarily know what data sets specifically they need until after the fact. So that's why
Sure.
we always like to stress the importance of designing with data first and foremost in mind, so that historical forensics come into play and they can go back and look at any of those analytics at any point in time. So when they do need the information, they can quickly go back and reference what they need.
Okay. That's good. I guess so what kind of verticals as far as customers go are leveraging location services or would benefit from it, in your opinion?
That's a great question. So we're seeing a lot in commercial office space because there's
Okay.
across the board, there's this compression across the real estate portfolios, and
Sure.
people want to be able to better utilize their space, especially after COVID. A lot of work from home was happening, and now we're having return to office, and even hybrid work is really the mainstream nowadays. So we have certain requirements of being in office certain days and maybe working from home other days. So better understanding that balance and how to achieve the best balance for the specific organization is really front of mind for most people.
Okay. That's great. So I guess I want to take one step back here quick and not assume that everyone is, familiar with the term and I mean, if you were to define location services, how would you define that? And, and how do you, I guess, go about, deploying location services?
Yeah. So I view location services as a larger bucket.
Yeah.
Within a subset of that, we have the occupant analytics, and that's what really most people are
Okay.
focused on nowadays. But location services is really this two-way street, right? So
Mhm.
we have an overlay of a network that is able to take the telemetry in, and then we have all the devices and the people within the space. And those devices could even be such thing as asset tags on specific hard pieces of equipment that don't have
Sure.
network connectivity. We need
Sure.
to track those things. So that's really important for hospital and healthcare type of environments. We're
Agreed.
seeing a lot of asset tagging and tracking there. So it's
Okay.
really the kind of the two-way street. So you have to have, your infrastructure that enables the location services, but then you have your actual devices that are flowing through the space. And those devices communicate with that infrastructure to understand where they are in the space. And then the
Sure.
infrastructure understands where those people are in the space as well and can report on those analytics.
Okay. That's cool. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I know healthcare has been something that they've been using it for many years, but yeah, I know there's a lot of other use cases too. So you mentioned some examples there, but I guess where else would you use this as far as indoors, inside your facility? I mean,
Mhm.
how granular am I able to get? Are we talking, areas, zones, rooms? I guess kind of where are we deploying this once we think about inside our
Yeah, so
facility?
at the highest level, we're looking at replacing traditional badge data, right? So understanding the
Okay.
total occupants within a building. Are we meeting fire
Okay.
code? Do we have, what is the total count of occupants within a space on any given day? Does that reflect what was expected, or are we having far fewer or far less people? Are we actually making that hybrid work mandate? Then, as we drill down a little bit more, we can start looking at zones. So, if we look at something like an open office environment, right? Big area, lots of people in that space. There is some value in understanding how many people are in that space, but there's more value once you drill down to the individual zone and say, okay, within this open office environment, I have these three BUs, right? I have accounting, I
Sure.
have sales, I have engineering, right? Well, we want to get down to that subset and understand the details about those different organizations within the company and what they're doing and even how they're interacting with each other. And then, kind of taking another step further, then we get to the room level. And this is really important for all of your
Okay.
huddle spaces, your conference rooms, et cetera.
Yeah.
Gone are the days of the 1 or 0 as an occupancy sensor in the space. Is it occupied or not? We don't know if there's 20 people in there, there's one person in there.
Sure.
This is a really great data point for understanding the types of spaces that are being designed and if they're actually being utilized in the way that they were designed. So, do we have a 12-person boardroom where only two people are showing up to meetings 90% of the time? And if so, maybe we should consider that boardroom being multiple smaller huddle spaces because they would be able to be used more often. We wouldn't have issues with overbooking spaces. On the other side of it, we can say, okay, if nobody's in the space and we understand that literally no one's in the space, or there's only one person in the space and it's a boardroom, we can start doing a little bit of control on those spaces, and we can say that meeting should be released or that meeting shouldn't be held, or it should be logged as a data point for future reference that meeting space wasn't really being leveraged like it was meant to be leveraged from the design perspective. And
Okay.
then drilling down to that last final level is the
Hmm.
desk level occupancy. So
Okay.
we're often seeing with this hybrid work environment, multiple shifts or multiple people coming in and using the same space over different days in the week. So having that granularity of understanding the hoteling and reservation side of the hot desk environment, is that really an effective solution for the company? Out of all of those hot desks, are 90% of them being used or only 10% of them being used? And that really goes
Okay.
back to the we versus me space. And is that ratio correct? Did the architect and engineering firm design the space correctly for the company that's actually using it? And if
Sure.
not, these analytics can then be used during a refresh to really refine that space and hone in on what it should actually be used for and how it should actually function.
Okay. Well, that's really interesting. So thank you. So when you're talking like historical forensics, like you've mentioned, so it really comes down then to smart planning, right? It sounds like from where you've kind of alluded to and said here in this last answer is really around for real estate planning. You can now granularly look at usage in not only in rooms, number of people, who's coming in, desks, utilization down to that level. Sounds like.
Yeah, really important for companies that are expanding, opening multiple offices,
Sure.
even branch locations. That's really important for
Sure.
when you're trying to really have a streamlined process and that be more of like a cookie cutter approach. It's best
Okay.
to understand how those spaces are being used really down to the most granular level so that you can plan accordingly and you make the most efficient use for your space. As we all know, real estate's becoming more and more expensive,
It
and
is.
it's harder and harder to get a hold of. So companies are really trying to find the best way to make sure that their investments are paying them back with an ROI on the people side.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And especially as we're, customers and companies are coming back to work and, they're trying to find that right mix of, home, work from home versus like you, like your title, hybrid work. They're trying to find that right mix and not paying for that office space maybe if they don't need it all the time, but making sure that it is available when their employees do want that and need that space. So yeah, that's great. So I know you're in the Chicago office today, so I've been there as well a lot, and it's neat to see on the boards there when you can see like how many people are in the rooms and occupied, and it's kind of cool to see those analytics from the spaces integration and stuff when you walk around the office.
Yeah. The near real time functionality is a huge component to this as well. So,
Yeah.
you have that user experience side, which is a huge talking point with every customer nowadays. Is when these employees come back to office, we want them to have an incredible experience and want to come to the office and not
Yeah,
feel like it's a mandate, more feel like it's a
exactly.
magnet for them to come in and be a little bit more productive, be able
Exactly.
to collaborate with their peers, and just be a little bit more efficient and a little bit more productive in general. And in conjunction with those real-time analytics being visualized, those real-time data sets can be fed into other systems. So now when we were talking about the boardroom application where we had 12 people in a room versus one person in a room, now we can adjust the heating and cooling for that space to be very specific to the heat load that's in that room based on the number of people in that space. So I know
Yeah.
we've all been in meeting rooms where it gets really, really hot. It's overloaded meeting room, and then about halfway through the meeting, it starts cooling off. You start to get comfortable, and then
Yeah.
by the end of the meeting, you're freezing. Right? Wouldn't it
Yes.
be nice to better understand how many people are going to be in that meeting and pre-cool it so that you go in and it's a comfortable space from beginning to end? So that's what we're seeing a lot of drive towards, as a kind of a future state, is how do we use these data sets in real time to better optimize building efficiency and building operations as a whole.
Okay, so that's great. So I also wanted to ask, how are we accomplishing this? What kind of like signal types? How are we accomplishing the gathering of this data, the information? What kind of sensors, are we using BLE or how are we doing all this?
Yes, I love that question because it's the power of the network.
Yes,
Especially in my role, it's a big system of systems, right? And you're all often
sure.
looking at overlaps and how different technologies can be used for multiple different use cases, and how you can drive efficiency, and how the total package really kind of plays together to come to a holistic solution, right? So at the highest level, we look at our network, right? Our wireless network. So every space has a wireless network, and most companies we're seeing are going wireless first, so you don't have
Mhm.
Ethernet at the desk anymore. So using that wireless network, if it's designed appropriately at the beginning, we can have very detailed insight into the number of people that are in the space. So now you don't have to rely on badge access and reader data,
Mhm.
because oftentimes you get the employee coming in, but you do not get the employee coming out because it's not a mandate to badge out of the building, only in the building.
Yeah.
So maybe you have some great numbers around the total number of occupants in the building, or you think you do, but how oftentimes did an employee go out to his car and come back and then get double counted? So the power of the network relies on individual unique identifiers within the space, keeping people's data private and not understanding that this is a certain individual, but understanding that this is a unique individual and then assigning a random identifier to that individual. So using the power of the network, we can see all of the devices that are in the space. Obviously, those devices are tagged to a specific employee or faculty member, and we can even do deduplication. So if people have multiple devices, they have a cell phone and a
Yeah.
laptop,
Yeah.
we can better understand based on their connection and their
Sure.
authentication to the network that is one user with multiple devices.
Okay.
And then with the getting a little bit deeper, we start talking about sensors. So now, what if a person doesn't have a device? We need to be able to monitor a person in a very private way, not understanding any type of characteristics about them as an individual, but just understanding they're a unique person that should be counted independent of another unique person. So when we look at sensors themselves, we can look at first and foremost collaboration equipment. Collaboration equipment's always in meeting spaces. I mean, that's the intent of a meeting space is to be able to collaborate with other people in a hybrid environment. So we're using, edge-based video processing to understand all the unique people in a room, whether their face is showing or not. It's not facial recognition. It's actually identifying a person as a whole. Then moving on from that, we often incorporate third-party sensors into the platform as well. So using a third-party sensor may give you a little bit different view of a space. So if you have an open office environment and you have a big pod of desks, you put an overhead edge process video sensor over that space and kind of box off those little areas for the individual desk or the individual areas, and you can get a little bit more granular. And then we have Bluetooth. Everybody's phone has Bluetooth. Everybody's computer has Bluetooth. And that's the fundamental requirement for location services when you're doing wayfinding within a building. So the Bluetooth is really key. And it comes into play in access points. So already within your network, you have all these wireless access points throughout the building. And if you go through a location services first design, those access points can be your essential overlay for an indoor positioning system. So think about Google Maps or Waze, but inside of a building where you may not have necessarily great cellular or GPS reception. So we're essentially making the network of Bluetooth devices able to trilaterate an individual user between three individual devices. So oftentimes we have existing customers that maybe they have a high density wireless deployment and that wasn't location services weren't necessarily considered. Maybe the design was a couple of years ago or it wasn't at front of mind when they designed it. We have the ability to augment wireless access points with third-party Bluetooth beacons to kind of fill in those gaps and get that additional granularity. So with the technology today, we're able to get to a sub 1 meter accuracy level for indoor positioning and wayfinding. And that's a key part of location services today is wayfinding, return to office. People have never been to the office before. Maybe you have guests that are coming in. They have no idea of the floor plan, the layout. They have no idea where they're going, room names, etc. So it's really that user experience, again, kind of going back to that and making sure that the occupants themselves are having a great experience within the building, as well as getting all the telemetry and data that we want for future use.
Okay. No, that's awesome. Thank you very much. That's a lot of great detail there. And yeah, I mean, I know from a location perspective, we've talked about it previously on previous episodes as far as AP placement, things along those lines. If you're placing all your APs down the middle of a hallway versus in the rooms out north towards the edges, obviously those will impact your locations. So the density, like you mentioned, that will certainly impact the location as well. So you want to make sure that you've got like you mentioned, a deployment in mind there around location services if you're looking at going down that route. But yep. So I wanted to, I guess, ask as well another question about, as I think about smart buildings, I think a lot about lighting, and it's something that I get, questions on and as well. So can you give us some insight on what you're seeing as far as, lighting and how we can optimize that?
Definitely. And I have some personal skin in the game here because early on in my career, that was my focus as an engineer. I worked with lighting control systems and integrating with building automation systems. So I really like to group lighting and shading together because you're taking artificial light and natural light and you're kind of trying to make them both work together. Traditional systems would often use photocells and things like that. And it was really about the optimization of the system itself and, lowering energy usage through the lighting density and then the lighting control itself. Now we're looking at the user experience because that's forefront of mind for everybody. So from a user experience perspective, we can start looking at things like specific tasks that are being done, and we can tailor light to those tasks. So as
Okay.
a very specific example, you have someone that reviews paper documentation all day. Maybe it's engineering drawings, maybe it's finance applications, things like that. But they're looking down at their desk at printed material all day.
Sure.
Versus a coder who's sitting behind a computer screen and developing software all day. Those are going to be two different experiences for those users, and they're going to want different color temperature light and different intensity of light as well. So we
Yeah.
can better understand by that. Looking at the granularity of the different business units that are within an open office environment and saying, hey, maybe on the engineering side, these developers need a little bit different of a light output and a light temperature than the finance department.
Yeah,
So
that's
we can,
amazing because you're right, because we've all had it where we get in a terrible lighting situation. Maybe you get a headache, or one thing you said earlier too, and sorry to interrupt you, is that that resonated with me was around the shades and shading too. It's like, a lot of times then like the afternoon sun comes in and it starts heating up, or you want to, you got a glare like you mentioned. So
yeah, that's
yeah,
a great
sorry,
point,
just
Dan.
yep.
Because on the shading side, more often than not, buildings are incorporating automated shading.
Okay,
Traditionally, that automated shading was just a static program, and so the shades would
okay,
drop down at a specific time, raise up
sure,
at a specific time.
sure.
Now we're looking a little bit deeper into it. We're looking at solar tracking, and solar tracking is a little bit different
Hmm.
than a pre-programmed schedule for shades. Solar tracking takes into consideration the geolocation of the building, takes into consideration what other buildings are around it, maybe reflections, shadows, things like that come into play, as well as the time of year, because sunrise, sunset changes throughout the year. So that should really be more of a dynamic effort rather than a predefined schedule. And looking at that from a user experience perspective, exactly as you stated, you're sitting at a workstation. Maybe you're in a hot desking or hoteling application, and you've reserved this desk for the day. Unfortunately, you were running a little late to work. You didn't get the desk that you always like to have, so you're right by the windows.
Sure.
3 o'clock rolls around. All of a sudden, the sun is in your face. You have this horrible glare on your computer, eye fatigue, and everything else. Now we can start targeting that individual user and say, okay, we understand that this desk is actually occupied. So now we're going to be proactive and we're going to drop that shade just a little bit more so that shade level actually provides cover to the computer screen itself or the workspace itself, providing a little bit more clarity to that user and having an overall better experience.
Okay. Just thinking about this as we're talking here, if I'm looking at opening a new location or a new branch, things along those lines, and planning purposes for a lot of these capabilities we're discussing, versus let's say I want to, consider retrofitting maybe existing facilities. How do you handle those conversations with customers? Do you see a lot of people, drawing a line in the sand where it's just my future buildings are going to be, this footprint or this design that, from a smart building perspective, inclusive of all of this stuff we're talking about and more? Or is it along the lines more of, I want to go back and retrofit my buildings to optimize savings, get a return on that investment, things along those lines? That makes sense?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of a mix of both, right?
Okay.
If we have the opportunity to follow maybe a hardware refresh cycle, that
Okay.
gives us a little bit more opportunity during a refresh or a retrofit.
Sure.
So we can start looking at doing more things over low voltage, and PoE lighting
Sure.
and PoE shading is a great example of that. So
Sure.
now if you look at it from that lens and it's a new construction project and you go the low voltage route, then when you come to your refresher, your
Mhm.
update or your reconfiguration of the space, everything becomes exponentially easier to move and reconfigure,
Okay.
especially with everything being IP based and
Sure.
software controlled. No longer are the days of a bunch of electricians having to come in and rewire everything and a bunch of
Exactly.
unionized and skilled labor work.
Sure.
Oftentimes, with those types of solutions, internal IT staff or OT staff, operations technology, we're seeing that a little bit more often. That
Sure.
traditional facilities role being a little bit more technical these days. So now,
Sure.
oftentimes, those members of the internal organization can make those changes at a lower cost with a higher level of ownership.
Okay. Um, so more specifically then, like, so you mentioned hardware refresh. So it's more along the lines of like, let's say I don't have the PoE budget today in my old, maybe dated equipment. And as I cycle in, I'm looking at the new like 90-watt power switches, or I mean, is that what you're specifically referring to?
Yeah, definitely. And if that's not the opportunity, if there's not a hardware refresh shop or you can't look at those
Sure.
types of things, really what I try to focus on and what a lot of my peers try to focus on is designing with data. And
Okay.
so understanding first and foremost, what are the important data sets and what data sets need to be shared between systems for some of these integrations and optimizations. And then
Sure.
going through your design process, really focusing on those data sets and making sure that you capture those. So it's not necessarily all about the hardware. It could be a
Sure.
big component, and it could be a way to leverage more functionality out of a space.
Sure.
But really, it's designing for data first and foremost,
Okay.
and trying to plan, what you may need in the future. And if you can't plan for what you need in the future, try to capture all of it so that you have all of that data when you do know what you need readily accessible.
Here's a question coming in around like pure benchmarking. Is there a way to look at how my building or buildings footprint compares to my competitors or my peers in the industry or something along those lines?
Yeah, definitely. First starting with a portfolio. If you have a portfolio of buildings, multiple campuses,
Sure.
people really want to understand, is my, X building automation system here running as efficiently as my
Mhm.
Y building automation system in this other location. And
Sure.
so you can start, as long as everything's connected, secure, automated,
Hmm.
like we do on the network in a converged
Of course.
environment, we can look at all of that data and we can say, hey, these buildings from a scale perspective are roughly the same square footage. This one's this much more efficient than the other one. Why is that? So then we can
Okay.
start drilling down into that historical data, doing the forensics and better understanding why that's happening. And if we don't collect that data in the first place, there's no way to benchmark those two buildings or campuses against each other. And
Of
then as
course.
an industry, oftentimes my customers are asking what their peers are doing when we're planning and
Sure.
we're going through the design phase.
I'm sure.
Um, you know, uh, X big company in finance wants to know what Y big company in finance is doing right next to them. They want to be
Exactly.
competitive.
Get
The
that
market is
advantage.
yep,
Yep.
it's very competitive across the board now. So everybody wants to make sure that no one's outpacing
Exactly. They don't
them
want to be
without
left
their
behind.
knowledge. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. That's great. I wanted to change gears a little bit here on, you talked a little bit about temperature and things along those lines. And I think a lot, other things come into play when you talk about the quality of the indoor experience and indoor air quality. So I wanted to ask you about, sensors and indoor air quality, on that topic. Is that something that you talk about as well with customers? And,
Oh, definitely.
who's interested in that and monitoring that?
Yeah, indoor air quality is something I'm very passionate about. It's a big
Okay.
differentiator in the overall productivity of an employee. It's very hard to
Yeah,
measure that productivity change, but
sure.
we have all felt it. When there's too many people in a conference room, it fills up with CO2. Everyone starts to get tired. They don't
Sure.
feel well, as well as sick days. We want to minimize sick days as much as we can. We want employees to be healthy. We want them to be well. We want them to come into the office. We
Of
want them to be
course.
excited to come into the office. Don't not
Yes.
think that they're going to get sick or anything like that.
Exactly. Yep.
So especially since COVID, it's something that people are paying a
Yeah.
lot more attention to, and it
Yeah.
is a common topic with just about all of my customers these days.
Okay. So like specifically what then along the lines of like indoor air quality, what, other than temperature, what else can we monitor and report on and track and
Yeah, even just temperature alone with traditional HVAC systems,
sure.
we're often taking that temperature in duct in the return plenum. So
Hmm.
that is, it's not in the actual space. It's not within what we call the breathing zone, where an occupant is actually sitting and breathing the air. It's
Hmm.
often air that is, higher temperature. Maybe even multiple rooms are pulled into the same return plenum. So you don't really have that insight into what is the space actually feeling. So
Sure.
getting that granularity is really important just from the temperature side, and then humidity as well. So when you look
Okay.
at indoor air quality, it's really an augmentation to that existing HVAC system and providing additional data points for that system to optimize itself to be a little bit more efficient and understand a little bit more about the space. So temperature, humidity, and CO2 are the three big things that are often deployed as a part of a traditional HVAC system. And what we're doing is we're adding granularity by providing that in a very accurate way with distributed IEQ sensors. Then moving on, there's a couple other components that are really big. It's volatile organic compounds, which is chemicals in the space. Oftentimes when new construction happens, adhesives, different types of materials are used
that
during
new
the construction
smell.
yeah, nobody likes that, but it's actually not very good for you either, and it can cause headaches.
I'm sure.
Even down to neurological issues if it's that concentrated.
Wow.
So that's something we really want to be conscious of.
Sure.
And then the last thing that I view as probably the most important is particulate matter. So as particulate matter is concerned, we can step down to smaller and smaller particulate sizes that we're monitoring, and those sizes have various different implications. The standard in the industry right now is PM 2.5. That's typically the particle size that can be ingested in your lung and will stay in your lungs because it's not small enough to be coughed out or processed by your body. As we go down to PM1, that's a smaller particulate size. It gets even more important. And nowadays with sensor technology, we can even go to 0.1, and 0.1 is getting down to the virus level. So now we can start tracking how much virus level particulate sizes, and that particulate size specifically is something that virus can attach to and can spread throughout the air. So now, post COVID, that was something that was heavy on the minds of IQ developers, is how do we get granular enough to detect viruses and potential contaminants in the air that are smaller than we were able to see before.
Okay. So am I going to be able to tell when it's like Taco Tuesday and there's when I should avoid the office or
Yeah. So actually, you can kind of pick up on some of those things. You can pick up on just from like the dashboard that we were speaking of earlier. You can walk into a space and you can quickly see if a space has been maybe renovated, the carpet's been repaired or something. You can quickly see if the VOCs are elevated in that space, and you're a sensitive individual to that. Maybe you're very sensitive to migraines. That's something that is common for a lot of people.
It is.
It would be that would be an area that you would choose to avoid that day. And had you not had that insight and had that sensor not been in the space, you wouldn't have known, maybe gone and sat in that space and then had to deal with a migraine for multiple days after the fact.
That's good. Yeah, that's good. So as far as, where we're looking that people are leveraging this, is it everywhere across the office, or are there specific areas or verticals that are, looking at this, monitoring this more so? So that's, I guess, who and where are we seeing this?
So we're definitely trying to monitor it in common areas and open office environments. Typically, those are very large areas. You have tens, maybe even tens of thousands of square feet in a single open office environment. Some windows, some are close. Some seats are close to the windows. Some are more close to the core of the building. Some are under the main trunk of the HVAC system. Some are at the very edge of that trunk of the HVAC system. So you're going to get a very different reading depending upon where you're at in the space. And if we relied on traditional HVAC systems, we would only be catching the return air from that entire space. So we would have no granular data. So it's really important to break up those spaces and better understand a cross section, because if you put 5 sensors in space and then you average those sensors, you're going to get a much more accurate representation of what's happening in that space rather than just pulling one number from the aggregate of everything. And then you can drill down a little bit more and see maybe this area by the windows is hot all the time. So we need to adjust the venting to that space and maybe provide a little bit more cool air there, and then close the VAVs off to a space where it's a little bit colder and kind of balance out the temperature. So this is oftentimes done in what's called continuous commissioning or retro commissioning. Retro commissioning is where someone manually comes in and does this process. Continuous commissioning is using the data to do so. And that's really the better approach because it's ever evolving, it's ever changing to the actual needs of the space.
Okay. That's great. I wanted to ask a little bit about integrations. And when we spoke about kind of prep for the episode, and I, begged you to come on here and talk to me, we talked a little bit about some, tools that could integrate with these systems. And I know we talked about like, gunshot detection, even though I hate to bring that up and I hate to even think about that. But what types of integrations are, available, or what, are things that are, again, top of mind with maybe you and or your customers?
Yeah, what I'm seeing and hearing the most now is, we have all types of options for IoT sensors. We have leak detection sensors. We can do pretty
Sure,
much anything from a sensor perspective nowadays. It's
sure.
really the harmony of all of these systems working together. So, as an example, if we have an individual meeting space and we have one occupancy sensor in there for the lighting control system because it's required by code, do
Hmm.
we really need another occupancy sensor for the HVAC system and then another sensor for the AV system in the space? Or can
Sure,
we use one sensor and share that data across all platforms and have a unified sensing point? And I think
sure,
that's really, really important as we move forward with the intelligent building practice as a whole, is better understanding the system of systems and how everything could and should work together, not only for the sake of cost reduction, but for the sake of complexity reduction as well.
sure.
If we have one single data point that's very accurate and we can use it for multiple systems, that definitely streamlines the process for the facilities team and the operations team moving forward.
Okay. Thank you. That's good. So I also lastly here, we're running out of time, but I wanted to ask you a little bit about building certifications and how, what you talk with customers on that front. I know LEED is something probably many of us heard about, maybe we don't understand, other than the fact that I can't get good cell service when I'm inside that LEED building, maybe, but
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I got to use Wi-Fi calling or something there. But could you talk a little bit about that and like what are some of the conversations you're having with customers around certifications and smart buildings?
Yeah, across the globe, every country, every region is pushing for increased efficiency, lower operation costs, things like
Mhm.
that. So these certifications really come into play, not only for that, but for other reasons as well. The user experience.
Mhm.
Again, the user experience is so front of mind for every one of my customers. We're looking at any and every way we can optimize that experience for them.
Yeah.
So looking at things like well is a very important certification for the occupants and people within a space. It's really focused more on the people rather than the building systems and the building efficiency itself. And historically, that really was the focus: is how efficient is this building? Can the HVAC system run at a lower cost? Can we use less electricity? Can we use less gas? Things like that.
Okay.
Now it's
Okay.
focused on not only that, but the wellness of employees and the productivity and efficiency of the employees themselves. So we're looking at optimizing everything because the building is there for the people, but the people are there for the building too. So it's really,
Yeah.
again, that two-way street. We need to consider both sides of it. So when
When
we
you
drill a
mentioned
little,
well, sorry to ask you a question here, but I'm assuming
no,
that's an acronym, maybe, maybe not.
that's just the certifying body. So
Oh, okay. Got it.
yep. And then Reset is another certifying body for indoor air
Okay.
quality specifically. They
Thank
also
you.
cover materials and some things like that. And one of the things that I love about Reset, and there's all kinds of certification programs out there. There's
I'm sure.
Fitwell. There's tons of different programs in the European Union,
Sure.
tons in the Asia Pacific area, and they're all different.
Sure.
They're region specific, right? Some are more aggressive than others, but oftentimes there's a crosswalk between them, and there's commonalities between them. So one of the biggest commonalities between them is indoor air quality. That is a component that not only resides within the building efficiency side of things, but also the employee efficiency and the employee experience side of things. So as we drill into that a little bit more, I personally am a Reset AP and accredited professional. So that means I'm qualified to design and also quality control and quality assurance check various indoor air quality designs.
Nice.
And being through reset, that's a three-pronged approach. It's a design approach, making sure that it's designed correctly. We have all of those common areas covered with the square footage requirement. We're looking at representative space types. So we're looking at huddle spaces versus conference rooms versus boardrooms. And we're looking at each of those individually, and we're getting a good sampling of data from each of those. Then the next prong is the data side of it. We want to make sure that the data is clean, is accurate, it's reportable, and that we can pull reports for these certifications from other people like well, and we can continuously show that we're still meeting that requirement from day one occupancy. And then the last prong here is the actual hardware. So making sure the sensors themselves are accurate. Everybody knows nowadays, if you want an IoT sensor that does X, there's 10 different companies that make that sensor. And out of those 10 different companies that make that sensor, there's probably 5 spinoffs of each that are just a copy of it, right?
Sure.
So with all of that out there, there's a lot of confusion in the market, and we really need a way to hone in to make sure that that device is going to be reliable, accurate, and it's something that we can really rely on that data set. Because again, the data side of things is the most important thing that we can consider, and making sure that we have accurate and reliable data really relies on the sensor quality itself. So looking at those three prongs, we're able to design an indoor air quality system that we have a very high level of confidence in, not only for day one, but for the future. And that parlays right into the LEED conversation, where during initial occupancy for a building, everything is measured, right? And oftentimes that's done by hand. Someone comes in with reference grade equipment. They measure all of these indoor air quality parameters. As a specific example, there's more to LEED than just indoor air quality. But they measure all of this by hand. That's a big cost and a big effort for one single point in time of data.
Snapshot of time.
Yep. So the with LEED V5, which is the upcoming iteration of LEED, you can get an additional 9 points for continuous monitoring. So setting up all of those IQ sensors day one to get your initial certificate of occupancy, but then also continuously monitoring all of those parameters for the future so that you keep your wellness certifications and you're able to continuously look at that indoor air quality and then reference back to it in the future should you have any issues or should you want to optimize your design for a new building or during a refresh.
Excellent. Well,
and for anybody that doesn't know, those 9 points are huge. If you're trying to make it from LEED Gold to LEED Platinum, that's really one of the hardest jumps you can possibly make. And traditionally, you had far fewer points just for the indoor air quality component. So 9 points for continuous monitoring is really, really big.
That could be the difference between gold and platinum. Interesting. Okay. That's great. Well, anything else we want to talk about? I think we're almost out of time, but anything in summary that we missed or you'd like to cover?
No, I think you did a really great job of running through everything, Dan. I really appreciate you having me on. I love talking about this stuff, and it's something that I practice what I preach. I have POE lighting, I have IAQ, I have presence detection sensors at home in my own environment. You know, I really believe in all of this stuff, and I've seen it over my career. My career has entirely been focused on smart buildings and all components within a building that come into play on this various, subsystems as a part of the greater system.
Nice. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Mike, for your time and for having this fun conversation about smart buildings. I learned a lot. Hopefully, our viewers learned a lot. And if they want to follow up with you by chance, how would they do that? Or should they reach out to their account team?
Yeah, either that or reach out to me on WebEx, shoot me an email. I'm really responsive, and like I said, if I don't know the answer, I'll get you to the right person. But I very much enjoy getting into the technical weeds and talking about this stuff in detail as it pertains to clients, customers, or specific buildings, or even strategy as a whole. What does this look like? What does the industry think of this as a general consensus? Yeah, definitely reach out to me by any means. I'm always happy to take a call and help anyone that I can.
Yeah, and we have some great examples in some of our offices that we've been opening around the country too. But
definitely.
So thank you. Yeah, thank you very much, Mike. I don't see any other questions here. So I would like to, again, thank everyone for tuning in. remind you that this is all out there on YouTube, youtube.com/@getunplugged. If you want to reach out to us, you can email us at getunplugged@cisco.com. If you want to get a hold of us, you can also grab us or reach us on Twitter at Unplugged80211 or Threads Unplugged Connectivity. So until next time, stay connected and unplugged.